How do you look at the important messages coming out of Secretary Mattis' speech this time?
Well, I think his remarks at the Shangri-La Dialogue can, to some extent, reflect the new Asia-Pacific policy, which will be implemented by the Trump administration.
Can we see a very clear picture? What is the new Asia-Pacific policy under President Trump? Is it a continuation of Mr. Obama's pivot to Asia?
We didn't see a clear and comprehensive outline put forward by Mr. Mattis at the conference about the U.S. new Asia-Pacific policy. But we can see through his remarks some key elements in the future Asia-Pacific policy. First, I think is that the United States will continue to cooperate with China in some regional and international issues, including the Korean Peninsula issue. And at the same time, the new administration will continue to maintain and strengthen its alliances with its allies, including Japan and Australia. But the new administration will call for these allies to share more economic burden with the United States for the deployment of the U.S. troops in these countries. And third, I think the new administration will continue to use the maritime disputes in this region, including the South China Sea and the East China Sea maritime disputes, and also the Taiwan issue as tools to contain China.
Mm-hmm. What is special about what Mr. Mattis mentioned as the rules-based order? First of all, is it something new, and what is his intention by bringing this up?
Well, actually, the word rule-based order is not the first time to be put forward by the United States side. We remember that during last year's Shangri-La Dialogue, the former Secretary of Defense of the United States, Mr. Carter, first put forward this idea of the so-called rule-based order. So speaking about the rules, so we insist that no matter international rules or regional rules should be established or set up by the majority of the countries, not by one country, the United States, or a small group of countries like the United States, Japan, and its allies, Australia. It should be accepted by a majority of the countries in this region and the world at large. Mm-hmm. So talking about rules, actually the United States hasn't ratified the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the UNCLOS, and also Australia has exited from the UNCLOS in 2002. So I think these two countries have no qualifications to comment on the so-called rules or the rule-based order. First, they should ratify and accept this UNCLOS, which has been ratified by over 150 countries in the world.
Now, on May the 18th, China and ASEAN countries have come to an initial framework for the Code of Conduct, a joint effort to build a peaceful environment in the South China Sea. However, Secretary Mattis mentioned in his speech that China is showing contempt for the interests of other countries in South China Sea. How is it possible that the United States failed to recognize China's and the regional countries' efforts in this regard?
Well, obviously, the United States has turned a blind eye and deaf ear to the development in the South China Sea situation. We can see that ever since last July, all the claimants in the South China Sea dispute, including the Philippines, have agreed to return to the appropriate way of negotiations to peacefully settle the South China Sea disputes. And China have worked out with ASEAN countries the framework of the COC, the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea. And also, China and the Philippines have concluded their first meeting on the South China Sea issue. on the bilateral mechanism. So the United States should see that the situation in this area has calmed down. But under such circumstances, the United States still sent its warships to the South China Sea to conduct the so-called freedom of navigation, which severely provoked or challenged and endangered China's security and sovereignty.
So it's a really intentional blindness to how should I say, to serve their own interest in this region.
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about Taiwan as well, because Secretary Mattis mentioned Taiwan, but he did not mention the 3 joint communiques, which has always been the cornerstone of the US's One China policy. But he mentioned its domestic law, the Taiwan Relations Act. How do you look at this choice of wording in his speech?
Well, this is the first time for the Secretary of Defense of the United States to put forward the Taiwan issue at Shangri-La Dialogue. So this is astonishing to many people, many countries in the world. I think Mr. Mattis' remarks are totally irresponsible, because we know that the Taiwan Relations Act is only an internal law, domestic law of the United States. It should not override the 3 joint communiques reached by the 2 countries. Actually, these 3 joint communiques can be looked as or taken as international agreements between 2 countries. This is a political commitment of the United States government. So Mr. Mattis should adhere to the 3 joint communiques reached by the 2 countries.
When President Trump said they will abide by the One China policy, is it implied, is it implied that the 3 joint communiques would be respected as well?
Yes, absolutely.
So why do you think he has chosen to bring up this issue and defend the United States sale of arms to Taiwan? And at the same time, he also said that confrontation between China and the United States is not inevitable. What messages is he trying to send? Meanwhile, the United States also need China to work on the DPRK issue, right?
Yes. Mr. Mattis' remarks all cover 2 aspects. On one hand, the United States wants to cooperate with China on some regional issues, including the Korean Peninsula issue. Actually, I think this issue is an issue between the United States and North Korea. And on the other hand, we can see that the United States still wants to use the Taiwan issue as a tool to contain China.
Mm-hmm. So looking further, how do you see the development of the US's Asia-Pacific policy, especially when Mattis is promising heavy presence of the US military, especially US Navy presence in this part of the world? Is this going to be, are they putting extra resources? Are they putting Asia-Pacific as a greater point of importance for them strategically, or pretty much continuation of the existing policy?
Although publicly the United States new government, new administration has said that it has given up the strategy of pivoting to the Asia-Pacific, or the rebalancing in the Asia-Pacific strategy or policy carried out by the Obama administration. But we can see that still the United States attaches great importance to the geostrategic position of the Asia-Pacific region. So it will still deploy over about 60% of its naval and air assets in this region. So with this kind of deployment in this region, so we can see, and we have seen that the U.S. military has sent its warships to the South China Sea to conduct the so-called freedom of navigation, which which provoke tensions in this area. So in the future, I don't think this is a good phenomenon to see for us to see the United States to deploy over half of its military warships and aircraft to this area. This will provoke tensions in this area.
At the same time, they're also counting on China to resolve the DPRK issues. So indeed, it's an impossible situation, right? On the one hand, you contain, on the other hand, you can engage. You want something and you don't want to give away. You know, you want China to do something, and meanwhile, you're bashing China for doing some other things. This is a kind of an impossible situation. But
yes,
one sentence, please.
Yes, but the Korean Peninsula issue actually is an issue between the United States and North Korea. These two countries lack strategic trust in each other.
So, thank you very much. We have to leave it there. Mr. Zhang Junshe, Vice President of the China Naval Research Institute.